It was his job to protect and serve. But now a New Hampshire police officer who allegedly referred to himself as Officer Sexy faces shocking child pornography charges. Court documents lay it all out, disturbing details of an alleged betrayal of duty. The cop allegedly sent disturbing messages about his desire to abuse underage girls, some as young as a baby. And it gets worse. Investigators say Officer John Giarrusso even helped raise money for organizations that helped abused children heal, but now he's the one accused of exploiting them. I'll walk you through the details. For Law & Crime News, I'm Kennedi Walker. This is Officer John Giarrusso's mugshot. It's in black and white. As an officer, he's not used to being on this side of the lens, but now his badge is at risk of being gone, and the accusations against him are as dark as the image itself. It all started with a tip from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and it led police to a social media account believed to be Giarrusso's. According to court documents obtained by Law & Crime, that account showed disturbing conversations and online activity, allegedly revealing a side of Officer Giarrusso's no one could have imagined given his badge. Investigators say Giarrusso's name, date of birth, and IP address were linked to an account on the social media platform Kik. And that account uploaded 5 videos that show children, some as young as 6 years old, being molested and raped by adults. Court documents allege selfies uploaded to the app additionally verified Giarrusso's identity. The complaint also says the Seabrook officer engaged in graphic conversation with other Kik users about having sex with their young daughters, stepdaughters, and wives. According to the complaint, Giarrusso used the username WTF201020_ETK. And from that account, police accuse him of sending several messages discussing daddy-daughter role play and saying at one point, quote, "My fantasy is a threesome with a mother and daughter." In another graphic and sexually explicit conversation, the username asks several graphic questions regarding a user's 12-year-old stepdaughter. The following is an excerpt from the conversation, but I must warn you, it is graphic. Username WTF201020_ETK, who police say they've confirmed is Giarrusso, allegedly asked about the breast size of the daughter, and then asked for a picture and says, quote, "Don't worry, I don't share, not an just a pervert." The conversations continued for several messages. The username said that he needed to have sex with the other user's 12-year-old stepdaughter and continued on with vulgar and graphic comments. Giarrusso is also accused of bragging to other Kik users who said they were underage about being a police officer and says the girls in town call him Officer Sexy. Investigators also revealed that during his time on the force, Giarrusso raised money for organizations that helped abused children heal. Now, these allegations paint the horrifying picture that the officer who swore to uphold the law is now accused of preying on the most vulnerable. Giarrusso is charged with felony counts of possession of child pornography, as well as distributing material of a child in the nude and disseminating obscene matter to a minor. Giarrusso pleaded not guilty to all of the charges and is out on bond. The Seabrook Police Department has put him on administrative leave. They released this statement saying that, quote, "While the Seabrook Police Department adheres to the principle that those accused of crimes are innocent until proven guilty, given the nature of the accused crimes, the department immediately placed Officer Giarrusso on administrative leave." They go on to say, quote, "Allegations of criminal conduct against a law enforcement officer are taken seriously and will be dealt with swiftly and appropriately." And joining me to talk more about this is legal expert Tyler Bailey. Tyler, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. This is a crazy story. The New Hampshire police officer is charged with felony counts of possession of child pornography, as well as distributing material of a child in the nude and disseminating obscene matter to a minor. If convicted, how many years is he potentially facing?
Well, being a law enforcement officer and him knowing better, if convicted, I'm pretty sure the judge who would be presiding and sentencing him would give him the max on this penalty. Law enforcement officers, they have a high standard, and protecting children is something that everybody cares about. Prosecutors, jurors, and definitely judges during sentencing. So there'll be no leeway for him here. And if he's convicted, he'll likely get the harshest penalty the judge could give.
What are the chances of this case going to trial, or is a plea deal more likely in a case with such serious allegations?
Well, if everything adds up, if all the evidence links up, I don't think there's a good chance of a plea deal because the plea offer would probably be the max. Because the prosecutors would like to make an example of a law enforcement officer, somebody who has the badge, who took an oath to protect and serve, to send a message. So I'm pretty sure the prosecution here, if they're offering a plea, it may be something like 1 year off, and with stakes so high, the defense probably have no choice but to try it. And so I don't think there's a good chance of there being a plea deal offered.
Do you think they can try it without having those, victims, potential victims or witnesses? I'm not sure, what the prosecution is going to bring forward, but are they able to try this case without those young alleged victims?
One, they probably will be able to get the parents to cooperate. And two, there's a lot of task force that most of the general public does not know about that's out there to look for people who are predators, who are preying on young children. There's internet task force to protect minors. A lot of times the social media outlets, messaging companies, and internet providers, they also cooperate with the government to turn over those obscene materials. So likely there's a big digital footprint here, and the parents more than likely would cooperate if there are images of their children as young as 5, 7, 6 years old floating around on the internet. I'm pretty sure it won't be hard to get people to cooperate.
Given the nature of his job as a police officer, how does this affect his sentencing compared to an ordinary citizen?
I think that, unfortunately, um, it's definitely going to affect his sentencing on the harsher end of this because there's a high burden or standard that's set for people who put themselves out there to protect and serve. Whether you're a public official, whether you're a law enforcement officer, you know better. And here, wearing the brass, having that oath that he took, having access to different resources, all this is going to affect him as a law enforcement officer. And I'm pretty sure he knows that this is not going to turn out well for him. I hate that this person who was preying on these children probably had some deep-rooted issues himself. That's the only thing that may be able to save him with some mitigation if he could, maybe articulate that well through his defense to the court in sentencing or any plea.
Do you think something like that could work if hypothetically he does say, oh, it's a mental illness? Do things like that work in these cases?
No, I don't think mental illness will be the route that will work because he obviously was competent enough to, have a badge and have a service weapon and put on a uniform every day. But maybe the only thing I could see that could be used for mitigation is maybe he was also abused or had some other trauma that he suffered that caused him to struggle with this. And that may be something that the court may consider in some sort of sentencing. But nothing regarding mental illness will help him because he was obviously had the requisite mindset to be a law enforcement officer.
The officer was allegedly using an app to share these materials. Does that complicate the case legally, and how might the defense respond to this?
Well, there's a lot of apps out there that sometimes are encrypt messages or they will delete after they're sent. But again, a lot of these internet providers do cooperate with the government to make sure that they're not being used to facilitate child pornography. It could complicate things if they're not able to track this information, but it sounds like they already have it. And that's what I was saying earlier about these internet task force and these digital providers who you like. What let's say your Signal or one of the other platforms that allow you to exchange messages and they sometimes delete. Those providers do cooperate with the government to make sure they're not facilitating child pornography. So although it could be more complicated, I doubt it is because they already have a warrant for his arrest. He's been arrested. They probably have a good digital footprint to try him here.
Is there any chance that the charges could be reduced or dropped based on a legal loophole or technicality?
There's always a chance of something like that happening, some legal loophole or technicality. Mainly, there could be some technicality in making sure all evidence gets in. You are still dealing with highly complicated digital evidence here. You'll need somebody to authenticate that information. It has to be done well. There needs to be a chain of custody. That makes a case like this a little harder to try just based off the procedural aspect of it. So, something, for example, let's say you're trying to get messages that were exchanged by some internet provider, and the person who would have to say this is legit evidence that came through, our provider would probably be somebody from, the Silicon Valley area, or someone who works for these internet providers who has to come to court and corroborate that evidence, authenticate it before it's let in. If there's a loophole and there's some problem with that, it could result in it being reduced because of just the challenge of getting the evidence in.
The investigation reportedly included surveillance and digital forensics. How strong is the evidence against him, and what could his defense team challenge?
Well, it sounds like the evidence is pretty strong because one thing that stood out to me is there was a task force that was already assigned to this. It doesn't sound like it was a one-off thing. It sounds like they may have been watching him and collecting evidence. In a situation like that, usually they wait till they have a firm amount of evidence before they even bring any charges. With there being a task force to protect vulnerable children, and so I think it's pretty strong. It doesn't sound like this was one message that was found on his phone by somebody and then turned over to law enforcement. It sounds like there was a specific task force that was out there and is making a case, and now they're ready to present to a jury.
What could the defense team argue, though, with the surveillance, just with it being through an app? What could they, if you were his attorney, what would you be arguing?
Well, the first thing is to see if there's something we call fruit of the poisonous tree, meaning if they initially got their warrant to start collecting this data and digital evidence by something that was not sufficient probable cause, that could result in all the evidence being thrown out. But a case like this, as a defense lawyer, what you want to do is you want to try to attack each and every piece of evidence. They may show you a photograph or a text message, but you have to look deeper and say, okay, how was that photograph or text message received? Was it done properly? Was there a sufficient warrant for it? Was there probable cause for the warrant? So you have to attack every piece of evidence. And let's say there's 10 photos out there that are exchanged. If you can keep out 4 or 5 or even 3, that makes the defense case a little stronger and may be leverage in getting a more favorable plea deal.
What impact does this case have on the public perception of police officers and their ability to be held accountable for criminal behavior?
Well, there's always bad apples out there, but something like this makes it even worse. Law enforcement officer who's exchanging obscene photographs of children, having conversations about having sex with children. Nobody wants anybody like that in their department. So I'm pretty sure his fellow colleagues who he served with as a law enforcement officer want no parts of him anymore, and it does hurt them because they're out there putting themselves out there to protect and serve, and then you got somebody out there who he's allegedly a creep, right? Preying on children. It hurts them because they want to have good reputations. They want people to trust law enforcement and not think that somebody who has a badge is using it for improper reasons.
Given the ongoing investigation, could more victims or details surface that could impact the case, and how could that change the charges?
There could be a whole lot more that we don't even know about now. And so anytime you're dealing with protecting children, it's really important that prosecutors look to make sure that all victims have a role in the prosecution's case. Sometimes what you have is they'll look at the stronger cases and they'll say, okay, we'll just move forward with these. And there could be 5 or 6 more. But it's really important when you're trying to make sure that it's sending a message to punish the offender, but also make sure there's some sort of justice for the victims to make sure they all have a chance to have their voice heard. And so when you're dealing with internet crimes, children, and somebody who clearly has been preying on them, there's a likelihood there's more evidence that could be found as they further look into the matter.
When police officers get arrested, is there a chance that their past work gets questioned? Like, for example, if he testified, in other cases or things like that, would now attorneys be able to dig that up and possibly throw out the past things that he was a part of, or just no, not really?
Well, definitely they can, because most of the time law enforcement officers, they have other cases that they're actively working on. So he may have actively made, let's say, 15 arrests in the past year or two, and let's say those cases have not gone to trial. The prosecution cases take when your star witness is now known as a child sexual offender. No jury is going to believe that person on the stand. So immediately, as a defense lawyer, you look at your cases where he's your officer, and you start talking to the prosecution about dismissing the case, or the bare minimum giving a very favorable plea deal, because it's going to be hard for the state to present a case when their lead star witness, the arresting officer, is currently facing charges for a child sex-related crime. And then you have to look at what other cases that he has prosecuted in the past, especially cases with similar facts. It makes you call those into question. It could be some leverage that can be used in the appeal process. It won't immediately be thrown out, but there's something that can be looked into, and maybe with a different level of scrutiny now that this has been revealed.
Now, he's been placed on administrative leave. How does this typically impact the case?
He should have been. Well, he's innocent until proven guilty. So allegedly, he's accused of doing this. So a lot of times, I think law enforcement agencies should immediately terminate the person with allegations this heinous. Being on administrative leave is not the right message. His bond was only $100,000. I think that was way too low for a law enforcement officer dealing with these type of allegations. And being on administrative leave is something they have their own appeal process to make in house for law enforcement officers. A lot of times there's unions involved, so it affects the case that they're still technically employed by the department. They're just on leave. But as things roll out and more is learned, it's a chance that he gets terminated before this case goes to trial.
Can you explain just what administrative leave means? Because I know that's usually a big question when they say, oh, they've been placed on leave. Like, are they still getting paid? Like, how does that go?
So you can be placed on leave without pay, or they can be placed on leave with pay. If you just hear they're on administrative leave, that means they're still being paid. They still have access to their benefits, and so he does have a family. So his wife, his children still have access to the health insurance that they would have under the law enforcement agency that he serves with. If he was terminated outright, that means of course you lose all your benefits. You're not employed anymore. But be on administrative leave with pay means that you're still employed. You just can't do any work, essentially.
Now, could the defense argue mistaken identity or claim someone else was behind these actions potentially?
They can, and likely, when people are involved in obscene internet activity, they usually use different screen handles and profile pictures and things like that. They can try to use that, but today's digital footprint, it's so easy to track down people because you have location that's being shared from your phone a lot of times. So even if he says it wasn't him, they could probably place him in the same proximity of where this internet exchange of messages and photographs was. So even if you don't have direct evidence of it, the circumstantial evidence will probably be hard for the defense to overcome.
Correct. And in the criminal complaint, I did read that they believe that it is the officer based on his IP address that's linked to his address and things of that nature. But still, everything is alleged. If the officer cooperates with authorities and helps identify other potentially alleged abusers, could that lead to a reduction in charges or sentencing?
It could lead to a reduction in charges. They can say that he's cooperated with the department, so they're asking that the judge either give a less severe penalty in any sentencing. But I don't see it resulting in the charges being completely dropped. The fact that he will cooperate now is different. I mean, he already took an oath of protective service, so he should have been arresting these people initially. Now, one thing sometimes I've seen when officers get caught up in cases like this, they put on defense that they were acting truthfully undercover for some sort of deep undercover operation that the department didn't even know about. That's usually the only good defense that sometimes works because jurors are intrigued by something. When you have a police officer saying, I was actually deep undercover with another unit that it was so bad that my agency didn't even know about it. It can play sometimes because it plays on jurors' imaginations, but I don't think cooperating is going to result in the charge being dismissed. The defense needs to be thinking of a big theme they could use to try to hopefully on their set aside get this thing dismissed or resulting in a acquittal rather than conviction.
Is it possible that the defense team will argue that the cop was coerced or manipulated into these actions?
I don't know if you can show that he's been coerced or manipulated unless there's been somebody who was forcing him to do it for some other reason. Let's say he was part of a different task force, but I can't see manipulated unless he was thought he was talking to an adult and not a child. But the thing that stood out to me are the photographs. So you can't mistake a 70-year-old with a grown person.
And lastly, if he is convicted, could he potentially be eligible for parole?
He could be eligible for parole with charges like this. Usually, the only cases where people aren't eligible for parole are heinous ones such as murder, where you have life without parole. But any other case, generally, there will be eligibility for parole after at least 80 to 85% of the sentence is served.
Well, this is definitely something that we will be following very, very closely. Thank you so much, Tyler, for joining me today.
Thank you. Anytime.
Giarrusso is scheduled to be back in court next month. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.